Good morning, welcome, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for today's webinar presentation, New Homelessness Funding, Thinking It Through. I'm Farrah McDaid Ting. I'm the Legislative Representative for Health Policy and Behavioral Health Policy here at CSAC. I'm joined today by two representatives from the Brown administration, which we want to thank very much for coming and joining us today. We have Kungu from the Housing Policy Development Analyst at the California Department of Housing and Community Development, and Lynn von Koch-Liebert, Deputy Secretary of Housing and Consumer Relations at the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. We're here today to talk about the massive amount of new funding available in California as a result of Governor Brown and the legislature's actions in the state budget for 2018-19. We are pleased to have representatives from the Housing and Community Development as well as the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, which are the two main entities tasked with implementing a lot of these programs and working with counties and cities to implement these programs. We're going to start with Kathy from HCD. She's going to overview a few of the new programs that are funded by SB2 funding. And then Lynn is going to talk about the Homeless Emergency Aid Program. I will wrap up with some notes about some of the mental illness and substance use disorder funding availabilities, and then we'll take your questions.
So thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share information on the homelessness programs administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. My name again is Kathy Kungu, and I'm a housing policy analyst with the department. So today I will provide a brief overview of the Senate Bill 2 Year 1 Homelessness Funds, the allocation, the eligible uses, the preliminary timeline on accessing these funds. In addition to the allocation of SB2, we will briefly discuss the No Place Like Home program. So at the end of the presentation, we'll have a brief Q&A or where I can be able to answer some of your questions. So, with the SB2, the Building Homes and Job Act, it establishes a permanent source of funding to address homelessness and affordable housing needs. 50% of the first year revenues, estimated at $125 million, are available to the department to assist persons experiencing homelessness and at risk of homelessness. So with the allocation of these funds, 50% of the revenue collected on or after January 1st, 2018 and before December 31st, 2018 will be allocated as follows. $5 million will go to Bridge at Kramer Place Emergency Shelter in Orange County. $5 million will assist Merced County in the creation of a homeless navigation center. And then after allocating those funds to the counties I just mentioned, the remainder of the funds will be distributed as follows. 50% will be combined with the California ESG program to fund the newly established California Emergency Solutions Housing Program. And you're going to hear me say the word cash a lot. 50%, the other 50% will fund the Housing for a Healthy California, which is the AB 74 legislation. So right now I'm going to talk about a little bit about the California Emergency Solutions Housing Program, or the CASH program. So eligible applicants will be administrative entities designated by the local continuum of care to administer the cash funding. So these include cities or counties or eligible nonprofits or your unified funding agencies. Eligible uses include rental assistance, that is rapid rehousing for expanded flexibility beyond the current parameters. So that means folks can provide rental assistance up to 48 months and also exceed 2 times the current hard fare market for the local area. These funds will also pay for operating subsidies in the form of 15-year capitalized operating reserves for new and existing affordable housing units to deeply target Californians exiting out of homelessness. These funds will also pay for flexible housing subsidies to assist local programs to establish and support rental subsidies in permanent housing, again to assist folks who are experiencing homelessness. These funds will also use to provide short-term housing interventions, such as your navigation centers, and also pay for some case management to connect folks to services and assist folks who are experiencing homelessness. These funds will also pay for system support, coordinated entry, updates to your homeless management systems, homelessness planning. And then the funds will be made available on a non-competitive basis to one administrative entity from each COC, provided that the AE meets the cash requirements. So with all of this, HCD anticipates cash funds will be available in 2 funding rounds. The first cash NOFA will be this August, and then the second NOFA will be in early 2019. So if you have any questions on the development of this program, we encourage you to sign up for email updates on the HCD's website, or email the department staff at cahp@hcd.ca.gov. So next, I will talk about the Housing for Healthy California program. So AB 74 requires the department establish the Housing for a Healthy California program on or before January 1st, 2019. The program will create supportive housing opportunities through grants that will be offered to counties for capital, operating assistance, or operating reserve grants and capital loans to developers. So the department is required to draft guidelines and notices of funding availability. So as I mentioned earlier, the SB2 funds will supplement the Housing for a Healthy California program. The department is developing the method of distribution and is also working to release the guidelines for public comments towards the end of December 2018. So we anticipate the release of the NOFA for this program in the spring of 2019. So again, if you have any questions on the development of any one of these programs that I just mentioned, we just encourage you to sign up for the email updates on HCD's website. Email department staff at cahp@hcd.ca.gov.
And Kathy will be producing materials that outlines all of this information as well either later today or early tomorrow morning, so that you can read these materials and see what the eligible uses are that Kathy just ran through.
Right.
Do you want to talk about No Place Like Home?
Thank you. So July 1st in 2016, Governor Brown signed legislation enacting the No Place Like Home program. This dedicates about up to $2 billion in bond proceeds to invest in the development of permanent supportive housing for persons who are in need of mental health services and are experiencing homelessness, chronic homelessness, and who are at risk of chronic homelessness. So counties can access these funds either solely or in partnership with a housing development sponsor. So the 2018 budget placed the No Place Like Home program on the November 2018 ballot, allowing voters to validate the bonds. In anticipation of the voter approval, HCD anticipates to release a non-competitive NOFA this August and the competitive NOFA in the fall of 2018. So this June, HCD released the county designation forms for counties who wish to use some or all of their funds for the non-competitive allocation for shared housing, and then also counties eligible to be designated as alternative process counties. So for specific deadlines for specific deadlines on the allocation of these funds, we just encourage our participants to review the designation forms, which are now available on the No Place Like Home website.
Great, thank you so much. And CSAC has been working since 2016 on the No Place Like Home program and working in conjunction with HCD on the development of the guidelines. And so those two pots of funding will be available. The non-competitive pot will be available sooner, probably in August. The NOFA will go out.
Correct.
And then if voters approve No Place Like Home on the November statewide ballot, it's Proposition 2, that NOFA could go out as early as December for potential disbursement in 2019. Lynn, would you like to talk about what the agency is doing?
Great, thank you, Farrah. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank CSAC for inviting us here to speak today. It's a great opportunity to be able to speak to the membership base. So our agency, the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, has been authorized with managing the Homeless Emergency Aid Program, also known as HEAP, established by Senate Bill 850 and signed into law at the end of this June. We are in the preliminary stages of translating the statute into an application with accompanying instructions, so I will be sharing with you the best information I have to date, but must note that it's still a work in progress and there may be some questions that we will not be able to answer today. With me today is our new Homeless Coordinating and Finance Council Executive Officer, Ginny Puttyfoot, and our new HEAP Grant Team Manager, Monique Pierre. We're very pleased to have both of them join this team. Also, Monique will be leading the HEAP program implementation. Today, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the grant program, focusing on funding amounts, eligibility criteria, eligible uses, and our draft timeline. I look forward to your questions as part of the panel as well. So as an overview, HEAP is a one-time $500 million block grant program with program funds directed to local jurisdictions for one-time uses that address homelessness. Given the emergency nature of this program, the Governor's Office and the Legislature have given our agency the authority to implement this program per the statute, exempt from the regulatory and Office of Administrative Law process. The HEAP funds are separated into three pots of money. The first is a $250 million program that will be administered through administrative entities, which for the purpose of the HEAP program are defined as continuums of care, or COCs. This is for cities, counties, or joint power authorities that declare a local shelter crisis. Distributions are based on a 2017 homeless point-in-time count ranges for the administrative entities. For example, $60 million will be split equally among the 5 COCs with a point-in-time count between 4,000 and 19,000 homeless individuals. Another example, $30 million will be split equally among the 3 COCs with a point-in-time count between 2,500 and 3,999 homeless individuals. If you look to Statute 850, Section 50213A, you can see a complete breakdown of these ranges. The second pot of money is $100 million that will also be administered through administrative entities, or COCs, in an amount calculated based on the administrative entity's proportionate share of the total homeless population based on the 2017 point-in-time count. For example, a continuum of care with 3.569% of the total homeless population would receive $3.569 million. For both pots of funds, the administrative entity can administer the funds to the jurisdictions that have, at the time of the award, declared a shelter crisis. For counties specifically, declaration of shelter crises would cover a county's geographical jurisdiction of non-incorporated areas. Cities within a county's jurisdiction would need to declare separately. Further, applicants within the administrative entity must demonstrate collaboration in its application and that they have committed to future collaboration with other city, county, or nonprofit partners. It should be noted that administrative entities representing cities and counties with fewer than 999 homeless individuals per their 2017 point-in-time count may submit a waiver for the declaration of the shelter crises. The third pot of funding is for $150 million, and this is allocated directly to cities or cities that are also counties with a general population of over 330,000. The $150 million would be subdivided based on the proportionate share of the total homeless population. Now, we will be administering this money through 2 funding rounds, with a third round that will be considered at a later date. Due to the emergency nature of this program, applicants are encouraged to apply in round 1. Our team will be reviewing applications and distributing the funds as they are received with the goal of getting the funds out the door as early as possible. If after the first round not all funds have been claimed, the remaining funds will be set aside for a second round of awards. Recipients from the round 1 may apply for a second batch of funding in the second round. With regard to eligible uses, the only stipulation is that funds must be used to address immediate homeless challenge. Also, no less than 5% of the administrative entity's total allocation should be dedicated towards meeting the needs of homeless youth or youth at risk of homelessness. Please do bear in mind in your planning exercises that 50% of the funds must be contractually obligated by January 1, 2020, and 100% of the funds must be obligated and expended by June 30th, 2021. Unexpended funds will be returned to the agency and revert back to the general fund. Finally, administrative costs are capped at 5% of program funds, but this does not include staff costs directly related to carrying out program activities. With regard to the application process, our goal is to create a streamlined application that both facilitates both an expedited submission and review for both applicants as well as for the review team. There will be one application for the continuums of care and a separate application for the cities with populations over 330,000. The application will use an online form and will front-load some of the documents that grantees generally provide after award. This is being done to expedite our processing time and get the money out as quickly as possible. Our team is still working on the timeline, but I can share with you a few key dates. A sample application will be available in August 2018 to enable continuums of care to start compiling their application information in advance of the Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA. Workshops, trainings, and detailed information will be available in that same time frame. The Round 1 NOFA is targeted to open mid-September 2018. We will start reviewing applications and awarding grants immediately after the NOFA opens. Applications for Round 1 will be due on or before December 31st, 2018. The Round 2 NOFA will open in January of 2019. As with Round 1, we will review and award on a rolling basis. And applications for Round 2 will be due on or before April 30th, 2019. Our team will be finalizing a detailed schedule in the near future that will outline when we will be releasing key information, frequently asked questions, etc., as well as finalizing the application timeframe and getting a draft application out for COCs to begin to consider. We will distributing information directly to the continuums of care and also invite you to visit www.bcsh.ca.gov, where the grant information will also be housed under the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council webpage. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you so much, Lynn. So the funding you described is the $500 million that the governor proposed and the legislature approved. $350 million of that is what counties are eligible for, but a county will need to apply to their COC, and then the COC will apply to your agency.
That is correct.
And then your agency will award the COC, and the COC will award either the city, county, nonprofit, the applicant.
That is
Is that
correct.
how it works?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that impacts mental health in the homelessness area, and then we'll go to questions and answers. I know we have a couple questions already queued up, so thank you, everybody. Kathy talked about the No Place Like Home program, and which will be on the fall ballot. There will be the $200 million non-competitive pot. The NOFA for that, the Notice of Funding Availability, will occur this fall. All counties are eligible for that funding. Then if the Proposition 2 is approved, then HCD will release the NOFA for the competitive pot of funding. And in the No Place Like Home program, counties are put into different buckets according to county size, and that helps you understand what you're eligible for. We, again, will be getting all of this technical information out Lynn talked about the different size of county buckets as well for the 250 million if you have a certain number of homelessness persons. So we'll get that out as well so everybody can see it. A lot of this is predicated on the 2017 point in time homelessness count. There was one that occurred in 2018, but it's preliminary at this point. So all of the legislation points at the 2017 point in time count. As far as how counties can apply for that 350 million, Lynn talked about declaring a shelter emergency. We'll have a sample resolution to help you do that, as well as other materials so that your county can do it. We did get a quick question about whether if the COC declares a shelter emergency and a city declares a shelter emergency, but actually the county that applies needs to declare the shelter emergency. It's a fairly mild piece of statute. It's not hard to do. And so again, in our resolution, you'll have the information you need to be able to do that quickly. On the mental illness side, not only the No Place Like Home, which provides money for permanent supportive housing, but the governor also did approve $50 million for the homeless mentally ill outreach and treatment program. This $50 million is very flexible. It's administered through the Department of Healthcare Services, and the allocation schedule should be released by July 31st. That's Tuesday, I believe. And so we've been working with the Department of Finance and Department of Healthcare Services on that allocation schedule. It is predicated, again, on the 2017 point in time count. We are trying to figure out sort of the factors and the numbers and how they work. But each county is eligible for a direct allocation for this purpose. It is incredibly flexible. Your county could needs to designate an agency within the county to administer the funding. That could be your behavioral health department. It also could be, say, if you have a homeless outreach department, or as we like to refer to them, the homeless czars, their department also could administer this funding. It must be expended no later than June 30th, 2020, and counties, after you've expended all the funding, you have 90 days to report a few simple data points on how you spent the funding. We're really excited about this because of its flexibility, and we'll be working with counties to show how you're spending the money, to prove to the governor and legislature and people of California that counties are spending the money wisely and doing what we can in our communities to bend the curve on homelessness. We have a few questions here, and some of them are related to sort of the unique programs that communities have developed. Mm-hmm. As we know, homelessness, the geography is different, the populations are different, your services and outreach are different, and so each county really has to develop their own approach, and many counties are well on their way to doing that. We have one question about a pit stop program in San Francisco, which I believe is mobile bathrooms or portable restrooms. Is that an eligible use potentially for any of this funding? It's hard to answer directly right now. I'll ask Kathy and Lynn. As Lynn mentioned, we are still developing a lot of these guidelines. That's why you don't see materials on this webinar right now, as we're answering questions, we're getting the correct factual information, then we'll get it out to everybody as soon as we can. But do you think like a portable restroom project for this one-time funding is a eligible use?
For the HEAP program, yes, it is. Mm-hmm. The stipulation in the statute says as long as it's supporting emergency homeless needs, then it is an eligible activity.
Okay, that's good. It's very, very flexible, and in county land we do like flexible funding, and I have to commend the legislature. It is incredibly flexible, so we appreciate that. There was a question about No Place Like Home funding. Yes, counties can apply for both the competitive and the non-competitive pots, so all counties are eligible for that funding, for both rounds of that funding. Lynn, we have a quick question. Can you repeat the agency's website, please?
Of course. It's www.bcsh.ca.gov.
Question about the HEAP program. That's for you, Lynn. Is it a competitive or a block grant to local communities? How would you characterize it?
The HEAP program is a block grant.
Yeah. That's in the name in the legislation. However, entities within a COC need to apply to the COC, correct? And the COC determines how to allocate the funding to those entities.
That's correct, with the caveat that we know that COCs operate in different formats and different structures, and so we are not requiring we are not putting any requirements or stipulations on how the COC allocates its funding. We are providing through the state block grants to the COC, and then the COC will use its business as normal for allocating these funds out to its local communities.
So that can differ in your community depending on how your COC is set up. In Sacramento County, it's a nonprofit. In other counties, the county housing agency sort of runs the COC, so it can differ depending on the COC. So it's not competitive. It is meant to be a block grant, but the COC will have to determine the priorities in the local community.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great,
Thank you.
great. We have a question about the ESG housing program for Kathy. Can you go over the program grant application timelines again?
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you. So the HCD anticipates to release the cash funds in 2 funding rounds. The first cash NOFA will be this August, and then the second cash NOFA will be early 2019.
Okay, so August and early 2019.
Correct.
Great. We have a question about declaring the shelter crisis, and this is one of the bigger questions we've received throughout this whole process is, well, what do you have to do and what does that look like? It's actually a pretty small code section, and we have a question about how to submit a waiver for the shelter crisis. So not have to declare the shelter crisis for the counties with a smaller homelessness population. We'll have that, we'll include that with our sample resolution so that counties with homelessness less than, was it?
999.
Less than 1,000 folks will have a waiver, but you will have to ask the agency for that waiver. So we will work with Lynn and her staff to get that process nailed down. So we have a question, and this is a great one, but broad, about the reporting requirements for the use of funding, whether there's fiscal reporting requirements or performance reporting. Again, this funding, almost all of it is one-time in nature. In fact, the 5 major programs we're talking about, I'm going to go over them again. HEAP, which is a Homeless Emergency Aid Program. The 2 SB2 funded programs, that's the California Emergency Solutions and Housing Program and the Housing for Healthy California Program. The Homeless Mentally Ill Outreach and Treatment Program. Those are all one-time funding opportunities. And so they have varying degrees of reporting. I will say for the HEAP program, there's very little reporting requirements other than having to have expended the funds by the deadline.
Yes, but that is part of the process that we're still working through right now, is looking at the balance of ensuring that we are meeting the statutory requirements, but also coming up with a structure that shows accountability for the funds. So that will be information that will be available in August as we work through that.
Great. And then for the homeless outreach, mentally ill outreach and treatment, you'll have to report on the number of persons served, some of the services, and how you expended the funds. That's in the statute. It's pretty broad. It's not meant to be onerous for counties. The CASH program and Housing for Healthy California, you're still kind of developing some of that, right?
Correct. And all of this information will be in the NOFA. And so, again, I always encourage everyone to actually review the NOFA so they can see the reporting requirements due to the department.
Great. So we have a question about law enforcement, and so what Lynn mentioned about counties showing collaboration in their applications, that isn't just collaborating with your cities or your nonprofits or other entities in your communities, but it's collaborating with the different departments within the county and your city. So there's a question about the law enforcement aspect. Each county can kind of develop what they plan to do with the funding. Using some of the funding for law enforcement activities may be an eligible use. We'll just kind of have to see in the guidelines that are developed. But typically, we have encouraged the use of multidisciplinary teams. The homeless mentally ill and outreach funding can also be used for this, where you have a law enforcement officer, a mental health practitioner, and a social worker or social services person. So ideas like that is something that these funds could be used for. Then we have a question about what is seen as more appropriate to declare the shelter emergency or submit a waiver. It's not an either or. Either you have less than 1,000 homeless people in your community and you're eligible for a waiver, or you have to declare the shelter emergency to receive the HEAP funding.
Right, and I would say in terms of the question about appropriateness, when we are evaluating the applications, there will not be a judgment call in that sense. The continuums of care that fall into that waiver category have the statutory right to submit a waiver, and we will read that as is.
We have a question about, to declare a shelter crisis that it costs the county general fund money. It actually should not. According to the code section, a county may declare a shelter crisis if you have a significant number of unsheltered persons in your community. There is, within the code section that's cited for the shelter crisis, for 7 entities, mostly cities in the city and county of San Francisco, where they have to do quite a bit of follow-up. They have to submit their ordinance to HCD for review. That only applies to those 7 entities in the code section. It does not apply to all the other cities and counties that are eligible for this funding. So again, declaring a shelter crisis should not necessarily cost you general fund monies. We would hope, however, that there is one piece in the toolbox that counties are using to tackle the homelessness crisis. And so what declaring a shelter emergency does allow you to do is waive some health and safety code sections to house people in temporary shelter. So we see that as a useful tool for cities and counties as well. That is at the option of the county. So it doesn't outright cost the county general fund monies, but if it is part of your comprehensive solution to homelessness, you probably are putting in some general fund monies on this as well.
One thing I can actually add to that is that we can actually support with a cash program. We can actually help folks build the temporary housing. So that's one of the eligible uses in the cash program. So I hope that can be able to help jurisdictions.
Great. And can you talk, Kathy, a little bit about some of the technical assistance that HCD is trying to make available as well? This is not necessarily related to the SP2 programs, but HCD is a wealth of information on all the uses of funding. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. So HCD posted a series of technical assistance procurements to quickly just bring on consultants who can help deploy and help grantees build the capacity to effectively help communities spend down these funds. So as you can see that we have HIP funds, we have No Place Like Home funds, the cash funds, and also AB 74. Communities can take advantage of, can request for technical assistance to build capacity. So ask for assistance for homeless plans, assistance with your coordinated entry systems, your data collection and analysis. Can also help just simply deploy how to deploy your existing how to access and deploy the funds using your existing resources. The technical assistance can also assist folks to design tools and guidance to both statewide and local to both local and statewide applicability to address specific challenges. And so you can have toolkits, just like CSAC is talking about. We can also help with housing first policies and also housing stability. So the technical assistance is really just there to assist communities to spend down these funds in the most prudent manner and also to address homelessness.
We have, again, another question about the COC and how the funds are allocated to the cities and counties within that COC. It is up to how the COC is structured, depending on the structure of your COC and your communities. There is no set, each entity in the COC must get this amount of funding. It depends on how the COC is structured and what the applications are submitted from the cities and counties to the COC.
The one thing that I would add is that the CSAC will only be able to give funding to those cities and counties within their jurisdiction that have declared an emergency shelter crisis.
So to be eligible, you need to declare the crisis, you need to have a homelessness plan. And
you may have a homelessness
plan, very nicely. We appreciate the flexibility. And so those are it's a really low bar to participate. It's possible that a city or other entities in your county may not apply to the COC for this funding. They will not receive the funding. It is only the entities that apply to the COC. Again, we don't have a sense of what those numbers would look like because it will vary by COC. We have a question, it looks like for Kathy. Can cities who already receive ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant funding, that's a federal program, apply for the new CESH, the California model program?
Correct. So these funds are available to non-entitlement and entitlement cities.
So cities who do get the funding and who have never gotten that funding.
Correct.
Right?
Non-entitlement counties, I'm sorry.
Yeah, cities and counties.
Cities and counties.
Let's see. Can funding be used to pilot a recuperative care shelter for homeless patients being discharged from a hospital? I don't know. We'll have to kind of figure that out, see what the guidelines are. Again, this is one-time funding. which makes the challenge for your boards of supervisors in how to design your programs and use this funding. One-time funding can be really great for standing up programs. In some of the programs sponsored by HCD, you can work on some of your technology and data gathering, which is a really good use of one-time funding. But it's not clear exactly what the other uses would be. Counties are always committed to having the continuum of housing for Californians, and what that ranges from is, the temporary, even 24-hour transitional shelter to the permanent supportive housing, and kind of everything in between. So a care facility like this would be part of that continuum. We'll have to see as the draft guidelines are developed. What do you think?
And I would say that for the HEAP funding, construction projects, housing projects are not precluded from the use of this funding. However, bear in mind that the funding has to be expended within 2.5 years of receiving that funding. So if it's something that's a long lead project, then this would be very difficult funding to use, and we will be pulling back that money. So I would just say that is not, there's in no way precluding housing as part of the structure, but it has to be done in a way where you're very cognizant of the timeline.
It's true.
So one of the things that I also would like to add is I just only mentioned the SB2 year one funding. However, communities are eligible to receive under certain requirements the SB2 year two funds, and under the requirements, they can continue to use some of this funding should they choose to continue to use this funding for homelessness programs.
It's true. Under the SB2 deal, the first year funding was designated for these 2 new programs, but the ongoing SB2 funding that will go to cities and counties can be used to continue the programs under these or for other housing projects. We did have a question, it got lost in the shuffle a little bit, about whether you can use this funding to purchase housing, and yes, you may, as Lynn mentioned, as long as it is expended by the certain amount of time. In the No Place Like Home program, as well as the HCD programs, you can use the money to purchase, acquire, purchase, build, refurbish, whatever it is that your county sees as the best route to housing people. This funding is fairly flexible for that. The one thing I would note is the homeless mentally ill outreach and treatment could potentially be used for housing as well, but it is intended as outreach and treatment funding overall, but we know that housing is the key component for our folks who are living with severe mental illness. So it's going to be a challenge at the local level to weave all this funding into a piece of cloth that works for your county or your community. Do you have anything you two want to add before we start to wrap up? We're going to review a few more questions.
I think actually on that note, as we've been looking at kind of the overlap between the different funding mechanisms, the timeframes, etc., between BCSH and HCD, we are looking at a roadshow that would help clarify the funding uses and be kind of a one-stop shop where you can go and learn about the different funding streams, how they can interact, how they can support each other, where they can fill gaps, etc. So we'll communicate that schedule out through CSAC as well, and make sure that the member base are able to attend those sessions.
Great. Any last words, Kathy?
Also encourage our communities to also just come to the Homeless Coordinating Financing Council, just because this is where you have recommendations being made on homelessness policy. In addition to the programs that we do administer within all our programs, I just think it's a really great opportunity for your members to come and just be at the table and just provide their comments and help us think about how to reduce homelessness in our communities.
Great. We have a number of questions that we aren't able to get to. We apologize. Many of them are very technical in nature about how you can use the funding, balance of state nonprofits within COCs. As the agency develops their guidelines and we get more information, we will answer those questions as soon as we can. As we've mentioned, it's an iterative process. It was passed as part of the Budget Act, and so Lynn has spent the last 6 weeks working nonstop on this to get the program, the HEAP, it's HEAP program, up and running, as well as HCD, which is actually using some existing programs and guidelines to speed it along, but they are also working really hard. CSAC, we are working with both entities, and we really appreciate you coming down here today to get these questions answered, get the word out, and serve as a communication for not only counties, but also the state agencies who are trying to get the information to counties. So I want to thank both of you today for coming here on short notice. We will have materials and more information soon, that I can promise, and I want to thank you for joining us for the webinar today.